Hello, Anthony Palmer. I'm looking over your Prezi, and I really liked a few points, especially Unit 1. That's where the majority of my, uh, you know, insights really got to town. Um, so let's just start from the top. I got a few notes over here. That's what I'm looking at right now. So for Woman Hollering Creek, I really liked the coverage of like failed perception of love by like media with all of the telenovelas she's watching and like the lack of experience because she really does come off as this like ignorant, but not in like the insulting way, but like ignorant of the world and a little bit naive viewpoint that I think is really interesting. And I really like the way you used emotional courage to explore that like ignorant and naivety. Um, I'm in another class, Brit Lit 2, and it really you talked about how she's willing to change the person she is in order to like portray this like image of herself to her husband's friends at the I think it was the ice house or the ice box, which I it just instantly reminded me of Wide Sargasso Sea by which is a preface to I think Jane Eyre. Um, or it's not a preface, it's a prologue, but it's added on by somebody else later in like the 60s, but um, maybe not the 60s, but basically in that story, the main character's husband like changes her name to Bertha in order to like claim some sort of like power over her. And I feel like that's obviously like an extreme version of what happened here because she is sort of in this one, Cleophas is kind of like herself, taking it upon herself to like adapt to the situation and in sort of this adaptations within her line of tolerance until eventually somebody else sees her and like gives her the help she needs to like push her over the edge to be like this is unacceptable, you can get out of this. And I think that was like a really important way that you like explored this like emotional courage that I didn't really I sort of thought about it that way but not exactly. I kind of explored it from like a more um you know traumatic type way where like the reaction to her trauma, so I really like the like emotional aspect. um you covered sufficing, which I think you titled in here suffering, but I think it's titled sufficing. But um, this is one of my more favorite ones because I really it's something that I personally have like to a lesser extent than in the story, but I've sort of experienced and I've witnessed friends who have had it like experienced it from like the child's point of view. And I think like you did a really good job of highlighting how like the relationship of the two parents, which was something like I overlooked, and how that sort of like rolls the ball into the direction of like healthily addressing the issue, even if it like really hurts. But like even though we don't get to see the end, I feel like this is gonna have such a more positive like reaction compared to like say Hell and Heaven, where I feel like Hell and Heaven is like kind of a different aspect of the same type of story, but it's obviously not the same because it's like an arranged marriage versus this one that's a little bit different. And I feel like, but they've got a lot of the same like themes. And I feel like that's something that's really just like underlooked is that family dynamic where like they're a team, they're working together, and they're trying to like do the best they can, and that includes helping each other. It's not like it's not two people working on one task. It's a team working on a task together. And I feel like that relationship is like something I completely overlooked initially when I read it. I am sad that they didn't have a little bit of closure at the end, but maybe that's what makes it really good. And then the last one that you did in Unit 1, which was appropriation of cultures. I honestly didn't really like this story, just because, I don't know, it didn't really resonate with me. I got baited a little bit by the musical undertones. I thought it was gonna have like a little bit more music in there. I'm a musical person. I really like, music and all that stuff. I got a little bit of a background in that. So I thought that would be a more major plot point, but it's really only featured in the introduction and the conclusion. Um, but I really like the way that you like displayed this like kind of emotional courage to like take back what it's not even like taking back, but it's kind of like owning the like situation and then like turning it into like something that like as a people, black people overcame, which I think is like super important. I feel like with the N word to a certain extent they kind of did that, and I feel like this is just kind of an expansion on that, you know? Because like I mean, modern, I guess not modern, but like post-colonial Americanism was like built upon like the backs of like slavery. So there's a certain level of like pride in the fact that they did make this country and they should feel proud. It's horrible what happened, but this like idea that like, this leads to a change where it, because they've took over the symbol as a symbol of pride, it like loses its power as a symbol of hate. And I feel like that's very fascinating. And I feel like it kind of opened up my mind to more modern sort of interpretations where we're actually seeing the opposite, where hate groups are taking innocuous symbols that we use in modern life and trying to like, and to a certain extent people are indulging them by letting them take over these symbols. Think like the OK sign or the, just kind of signs like that where for some reason we're just rolling over and letting them take signs that are like innocuous and turning it into hateful signs. And I feel like to a certain extent this is like the opposite. This is taking a hateful sign and turning it into like a, sign of like defiance and, proud that like they overcame like a generational struggle and tried to, be better than the issue. The next one I really had comments for was, I think the last one in Unit 3 or Unit 2, which was Saint Chola. Um, I thought your perspective on like this identity crisis was like really important, but like the comments about like maybe the word choice of saying the word like displaced might not be exactly correct because in the story she always talks about having like friends, like whether it's like going into the 7-Eleven with a bunch of friends who like I think she's like quoted as saying like the lady in the like in the counter wouldn't even be able to tell the difference between them. So that kind of says that they're all similar, like it's not like she's in a crowd of a bunch of white kids, right? Um, so I feel like she's got friends. So it's not like a displacement. I think it's more of like an imposter syndrome where it's like and it's sort of like what it means to be like an American or like what it means to be like a member of this community that like I think this was in 2003, so like this community that she's starting to see like hate towards herself. And so at that point, like, what commitment does she have to a community that's like portraying hatred towards her? And I think that that's the real crux of the argument. And I really liked the way that like some of your like word choice in here did shoot out as like, questions her culture on whether she belongs or feels proud of herself. And I feel like that's really the crux of like what it is. And that's why I think it was just a word choice issue and not like a concept issue. And I feel like that really got me thinking on like, the identity crisis that she experiences is so it doesn't outwardly display itself. It's very internal. She's keeping it inside. She's not, talking to people. She's not shutting herself off completely from everybody else. She still does in the end point her finger. She doesn't, just bottle it all up again and keep moving on. So that sort of shows like a reliance on other people too that I think is really heartwarming in a way. Got the warm and fuzzies when I read the end of that book. Made me happy. For Heaven and Hell by Jhumpa Lahiri. Um, I think that what you said was like this whole like concept of like misunderstanding or misinterpreting. It completely made me think about the idea of an unreliable narrator or the reliability of a narrator. Um, Specifically whenever you like contrast or you take that like concept of like misinterpreting like you did, and then you apply it to like the very end where you're realizing that the narrator of the story is narrating it from the perspective of like a like late 20s woman who just had her heart broken and she had a heart to heart with her mother and now she's sort of writing down why she loves her mother so much and like why things were rocky but why it like came back and why she's like this sort of like bedrock. Like this honestly seems like, something someone write as like a letter to like not like a letter, but like, something like a maybe like a journal on like why the people in my lives are like strong and why I like feel inspired by them in a certain extent because and why it's important to like talk. I feel like there's so many like issues and miscommunications and you sort of get it in like the misinterpreting, but then you make claims like her mother isn't jealous, which because we have an unreliable narrator, we don't know if her mother is jealous or whether she is homesick. Probably a mix of both, but we don't actually know. So that's the only thing. Like I just would avoid like what's it called? Like objective statements. Because we don't have like a quote we can point to be like, her mother isn't jealous at all. Instead, the mother is more afraid of losing Kaku to a different culture that isn't hers and feels homesick about losing a part of her culture. Whenever, like, the way it's portrayed in the book, it is very much a just her mother fell in love with this young guy who was actually, you know, looking for somebody as well. And while Kaku was more interested in, feeling that connection to home, she had never felt love before in her life. She was in an arranged marriage. She got shipped across the world. She didn't really have a say in what was going on, but that's the way that the culture works. So, you know, that's just how it is. And I feel like you do hit the most important point in the end, which is the daughter begins to understand the mother better without misinterpreting her actions anymore, which is true, and then it's not true because American culture and Bengali culture very much clashes when it comes to cultural values and you know we do see it. Like, you're not allowed to date people of a certain race, which is just, in America, we call that like archaic. But in, you know, the mother's point of view, that's just the way it is. So I feel like these are kind of things where it's not just the daughter begins to understand the mother, it's more like the mother accepts the daughter and accepts the situation she's come to be in. And I feel like that's like the most important part. And then for the last little bit, which I don't really have much on this one because I only read it once, which was a real live blonde Cherokee and his equally annoyed soulmate. I really like the notion of like reciprocity, where like he is judged by others, so he begins judging others. I didn't really, I kind of overlooked that, and I think I might have, read it again and maybe even included it if I really, took that to heart and really accepted that point. But I kind of just skimmed through it because I already had good points from other ones. But I really like that point. So yeah, I hope you liked my little uh, describing how your multimedia presentation enriched my perspective. Thank you.